Hi, this is Ted, and for the next hour, you'll be listening to a reading of articles and features from the Monday, April 13th edition of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. I'm sorry for the background noise. I'm in a hotel reading this to you, and this is the only place I could get to read, so I hope you can hear. Also, I know that I always say I try not to read things that you'll probably hear on the news, but there's so much news today that may be unavoidable. So here's an important article. To open the Strait of Hormuz, Trump wants to blockade Iran. Experts are skeptical. This is by Ben Hubbard. In announcing a complete U.S. blockade of Iranian ports, President Trump took a drastically new approach to trying to achieve what he has wanted for weeks, opening the Strait of Hormuz to global traffic. The president seems to be hoping that the blockade will heap new pressure on Iran after direct talks between U.S. and Iranian officials in Pakistan over the weekend failed to end the war, and he suggested that other countries would join the effort. But on Monday, there were few volunteers, with only Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel publicly supporting the idea. Trump's proposed blockade makes no sense, said Spain's Defense Minister Margarita Robles in a television interview. Since this war started, nothing makes sense, she added. This is another episode in the downward spiral that the world has been dragged into. Experts said they doubted that the blockade would get Trump any closer to an endgame that he could sell as an American victory. Denny Citrinowicz, a senior researcher at the Institute for National Security Studies in Israel, who studies Iran and its proxies, said, "I'll save you the waiting period. Iran's not going to capitulate. This regime believes that the damage that will be sustained by this act will be bigger for the U.S. and the international community than for Iran. Imposing a blockade entailed risks for the U.S., he said. It could further increase oil prices, deepening the drag on the global economy. The U.S. interdiction of ships belonging to, say, India or China could cause diplomatic clashes. It will also bring U.S. ships into striking distance of Iran's missiles and drones, putting American military personnel in harm's way. I don't see the Iranians raising the white flag, said Mr. Citrinowicz, suggesting that the United States would be better off seeking a compromise that Iran's leaders could accept. So far, it appears that the blockade will largely belong to the United States alone. Most countries stayed mum on the issue on Monday. A few, in addition to Spain, voiced their opposition. Prime Minister Keir Starmer of Britain said his country would not support such a move. His Australian counterpart, Anthony Albanese, said his government had not been consulted and instead called for de-escalation of the conflict. In a video posted by his office, Netanyahu of Israel said his country backed the blockade and was in constant coordination with the U.S. He did not say whether Israel would be directly involved in enforcing the blockade. The American-Israeli war on Iran, now in its seventh week, has scrambled global trade, roiled energy markets, and inflicted economic distress on countries across the world, harming American friends and foes alike. Intensive airstrikes by the U.S. and Israel have decimated Iran's navy, military, and missile launch sites, and Iranian activists say that more than 1,700 civilians were killed during the attacks. But the damage failed to make Iran more pliable during the weekend's negotiations. Nor did Trump's sudden announcement of the blockade brighten an increasingly gloomy sentiment about the war's impact on the global economy. Oil prices surged on Monday and stocks fell, suggesting that investors did not expect the blockade to be a quick fix. Trump could be overestimating how effective the economic pain of a blockade would be in changing Iran's position, said Ahmed Kasim Khan, a professor of international relations at TED University in Ankara, Turkey. He said Iran is already hurting, and they have shown that they are willing to take more than a couple of hits. The Iranian regime is not one that cares for the well-being of its citizens, and there is no civil society that can raise its voice against the regime in the face of economic calamity. Mr. Hahn added that Trump's message was undermined by his announcement that other countries would help impose the blockade without saying which ones. This habit of saying that people are on board with him while not naming them diminishes his credibility, and that doesn't work well for a U.S. standing internationally. In announcing the blockade on Sunday, Trump said it would prevent Iran from selling its oil to select countries. It's going to be all or none, and that's the way it is, he wrote on social media. In the same post, he said that the U.S. military would intercept in international waters any ships that paid Iran for safe passage, an apparent attempt to shut down Iran's efforts to charge tolls. In a statement, U.S. Central Command said the blockade would begin at 10 a.m. Eastern Time and apply to all ships navigating near Iran's ports and coastal areas. U.S. forces would not stop ships passing through the strait and using other countries' ports. But the deadline passed without any apparent attempt by the U.S. Navy to enforce the blockade. The naval arm of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards said in a statement on state-run media on Sunday that any military vessel approaching the strait would meet, quote, a severe response, raising the prospect of direct attacks on U.S. ships and personnel. It was not clear whether the U.S. had previously discussed the blockade with its Arab partners in the Persian Gulf or any of its other allies. As part of its retaliation for the U.S. Israeli attacks, Iran has fired drones and missiles at oil facilities and some civilian infrastructure in those countries, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates, disrupting their production and export of oil and gas. For the time being, it is complicating things, said Abdul Khalik Abdullah, a professor of political science in the Emirates, of the blockade. Things were already complicated, and this adds another complication to a very difficult situation. He blamed Iran for the turmoil in the Gulf, he said, because they are the ones who hijacked the Strait of Hormuz and don't want to relent. Among governments that responded to Trump's announced blockade, most called for a return to negotiations. It is, in my view, vital that we get the strait open and fully open, and that's where we've put all our efforts, Mr. Starmer told BBC Radio 5. We want to see de-escalation, and we want to see those negotiations resumed, said Mr. Albanese of Australia, who is preparing to embark on a diplomatic tour across Asia aimed at securing fuel and fertilizer supplies. In Beijing on Monday, Guo Jiakun, a spokesman for China's foreign ministry, called for a ceasefire for all parties to show restraint. China is willing to continue to play a positive and constructive role, he said. China is a major recipient of fuel through the Strait of Hormuz. And now here's another interesting article that you also have probably heard something about. Trump posted a picture of himself as Jesus. Now he's trying to explain it away, by Katie Rogers. The image showed President Trump in a white and red robe commonly used in renderings of Jesus Christ and in scripture prophesying his return. Bright golden light, which is used to depict divine intervention in religious imagery, radiated from Trump's hand as he touched the forehead of a sick man. A woman observed the scene with her hands steepled in prayer. As he received 2 bags of a McDonald's food delivery to the Oval Office on Monday morning, Trump told reporters that he did not catch all that religious imagery. He said he had thought the image he had posted to his Truth Social account had depicted him not as Jesus, but as a physician. I thought it was me as a doctor, Trump said of the social media post, which he deleted after an outcry. Only the fake news could come up with that. Only the fake news and everybody who saw it. He added, I make people better. The post's removal was a rare retreat for Trump, who had posted the apparently AI-generated image shortly after using the same platform to attack the American-born Pope Leo XIV, a vocal critic of the U.S. war in Iran. The appearance of the image had sparked an evening's worth of backlash from religious leaders and Christian supporters who were hurt and shocked that Trump had appeared to depict himself as a Jesus-like figure. Trump did not apologize for either post, just as he did not apologize for threatening to wipe out the Iranian civilization last week. "I'm fine with it," he said of the threat on Fox News on Sunday, because it had brought Tehran to the negotiating table. The post attacking Pope Leo XIV as weak on crime remains online, and so do countless posts from legions of critics who believe Trump's mental fitness for office should be evaluated. As a rule, Trump does not apologize for doing and saying things that hurt or offend people, and officials in his White House characterize his behavior as radically refreshing and transparent. Outrage from people representing powerful constituencies that helped elect him to a second term has only rarely prompted him to backtrack or retreat. In February, Trump deleted a racist video depicting former President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, the former First Lady, as apes after several members of the Republican Party, including Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, the Senate's only black Republican, called on him to remove it. Trump took the post down, blamed a staff member, and never apologized. "I just looked at the first part. It was about voter fraud in some place in Georgia," Mr. Trump told reporters of that video in February. "I didn't see the whole thing." A little over 2 months later, Trump was again in a position of explaining the thought process behind something inflammatory he posted to his social media account. Other posts sent on Sunday night included a rendering of a Trump office building on the moon and a meme mocking the long careers of Democratic politicians. Trump was talking to reporters in the first place because White House officials had staged a fast food delivery to the Oval Office to promote a Trump administration-led policy that has removed taxes on overtime and tips. A woman named Sharon Simmons delivered the bags of burgers and avoided the president's questions about whether she opposed men playing in women's sports. She stayed on message. "I'm here about no tax on tips." Standing next to her, and she was wearing a red shirt that said DoorDash Grandma, Trump refused to apologize for his post attacking the American-born Pope. "I'm just responding to Pope Leo," Trump said. "There's nothing to apologize for. He's wrong." Leo is one of the world's most powerful critics of the U.S. war with Iran. In recent days, he has condemned the worship of mortals and money, the pitfalls of arrogance, and the absurd and inhuman violence unleashed by fighting that has further destabilized the Middle East. Leo should be thankful because, as everyone knows, he was a shocking surprise, Trump wrote in a lengthy social media post on Sunday night. He wasn't on any list to be Pope and was only put there by the church because he was an American, and they thought that would be the best way to deal with President Donald J. Trump. "If I wasn't in the White House, Leo wouldn't be in the Vatican." On Monday morning, Leo told reporters he had no fear of the Trump administration. He added that he was not afraid of speaking out loudly about the message of the gospel, which is what I believe I am here to do. Prominent Catholics in the Trump administration, including Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Rubio, have so far not commented publicly. Other prominent conservatives, and not only Catholics, quickly expressed outrage at the image that Trump posted of himself as a Jesus-like figure. Does he actually think this? Riley Gaines, the anti-transgender rights activist, posed on social media. "God shall not be mocked." David Brody, an evangelical journalist with the Christian Broadcasting Network, called on Trump to take it down. Last year, after the death of Pope Francis, Trump posted a photo of himself as Pope and joked that he would like to be the next Pope. And you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And here's an article by Peter Baker, one of the prominent Times writers, and it's called "Trump's Erratic Behavior and Extreme Comments revive mental health debate. President Trump's erratic behavior and extreme comments in recent days and weeks have turbocharged the crazy like a fox or just plain crazy debate that has followed him on the national political stage for a decade. A series of disjointed, hard to follow, and sometimes profane statements capped by his "a whole civilization will die tonight" threat to wipe Iran off the map last week, and his head spinning attack on the weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy Pope on Sunday have left many with the impression of a deranged autocrat mad with power. The White House rejected such assessments, saying that Trump is sharp and keeping his opponents on edge. But the president's eruptions have raised questions about America's leadership in a time of war. While the country has had presidents whose capacity came under question before, most recently, the octogenarian Joseph R. Biden Jr., as he aged demonstrably before the public's eyes, never in modern times has the stability of a president been so publicly and forensically debated, and with such profound consequences. Democrats who have long challenged Trump's psychological fitness have issued a fresh chorus of calls to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove the president from power for disability. But it's not just a concern voiced by partisans on the left, late night comics, or mental health professionals making long distance diagnoses. It can be heard more among retired generals, diplomats, and foreign officials, and most strikingly, it can be heard now on the political right among one time allies of the president. Former Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Georgia Republican who recently broke with Trump, advocated using the 25th Amendment, telling CNN that threatening to destroy Iran's civilization was not tough rhetoric, it's insanity. Candace Owens, the far-right podcaster, called him a genocidal lunatic. Alex Jones, the conspiracy theorist and founder of InfoWars, said Trump does babble and sound like the brain's not doing too hot. Some of the questions about Trump's soundness come from people who once worked with him and have since become critics. Even before the Civilization Post, Ty Cobb, a White House lawyer in Trump's first term, told the journalist Jim Acosta that the president is a man who is clearly insane, and that his recent string of belligerent middle-of-the-night social media posts highlights the level of his insanity. Stephanie Grisham, a former White House press secretary for Trump, wrote online last week that he's clearly not well. Trump fired back in a long, angry social media post that did not exactly radiate calm stability. They have one thing in common, he wrote: low IQs. They're stupid people. They know it. Their families know it, and everyone else knows it too. He threw the crazy charge back at them. They're nut jobs, troublemakers, and will say anything necessary for some free and cheap publicity. The dissent on the right has not extended to Congress, where Republican lawmakers remain publicly loyal to the president, nor has it reached the cabinet, which would have to approve any invocation of the 25th Amendment, rendering that idea moot. But it reflects growing unease among Americans who in recent surveys have increasingly questioned the fitness of Trump, already the oldest president ever inaugurated, as he approaches his 80th birthday. A Reuters Ipsos poll in February found that 61% of Americans think Trump has become more erratic with age, and just 45% say he's mentally sharp and able to deal with challenges, down from 54% in 2023. Roughly half of Americans, 49%, deem Trump too old to be president when asked in a YouGov poll in September, up from 34% in February 2024, when just 39% he was not too old. Democrats have pressed the point in recent days. Trump, said Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, is an extremely sick person, unhinged and out of control, as Representative Hakeem Jeffries added, or more bluntly, batshit crazy. Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland wrote the White House physician requesting an evaluation, noting signs consistent with dementia and cognitive decline, and increasingly incoherent, volatile, profane, deranged, and threatening tantrums. The president's defenders pushed back. What critics call psychosis, they call strategy. Trump knows exactly what he's doing, wrote Liz Peek, a columnist for The Hill and Fox News contributor. Trump will continue to use maximalist and sometimes outrageous military and diplomatic pressure in his campaign to rid the Middle East of Iran's near 50-year campaign of terror. Trump, who in his first term described himself as a very stable genius and has regularly boasted of passing cognitive tests meant to detect dementia, dismissed the criticism of his mental state when asked by a reporter last week. I haven't heard that, he said, but if that's the case, you're going to have more people like me because our country was being ripped off on trade, on everything for many years until I came along. So if that's the case, you're going to have more people. Asked for elaboration, Davis Ingle, a White House spokesman, said in an email, President Trump's sharpness, unmatched energy, and historic accessibility stand in stark contrast to what we saw during the past 4 years. He argued that Mr. Biden had declined physically and mentally in that time, and that the New York Times and other media had covered it up. Parentheses. The Times covered Mr. Biden's health and age extensively in multiple stories. End parentheses. Trump's stability has been a recurring issue since he first sought the presidency in 2016. Numerous psychiatrists and other mental health professionals have weighed in with their own opinions even without the opportunity to evaluate him. John Kelly, his longest-serving White House chief of staff in his first term, even bought a book by 27 of these specialists called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump in an effort to understand his boss, and came to the conclusion that he was mentally ill. This is not the first time a president's mental fitness has been called into doubt. John Adams, Andrew Jackson, and both Roosevelts were from time to time accused of being unbalanced by political foes. Abraham Lincoln struggled with depression. Woodrow Wilson was never the same after a stroke. Lyndon Johnson veered between manic energy and bouts of gloominess. Ronald Reagan seemed to slip late in his presidency, and many wondered whether the Alzheimer's disease announced years later might have already begun affecting him. Some Trump admirers have compared him to Richard Nixon, who espoused what he reportedly called the madman theory, instructing Henry Kissinger, his national security advisor leading Vietnam peace talks, to tell negotiators that the president was unstable and unpredictable as a bargaining tool to secure a better agreement. But privately, some of Nixon's own advisors did not think it was all an act. Trump has at times tried to leverage his madman reputation. Make them think I'm crazy, he told Nikki Haley, his first-term ambassador to the UN, referring to the North Koreans. Do you know what the secret is of a really good tweet, he once asked William Barr, then his attorney general? Just the right amount of crazy. Yet Trump told the New York Post last week that this time at least he was not pretending. I was willing to do it, he said, of his threat to destroy Iran's civilization. The public focus on Trump's state of mind goes further than almost any past president. Other than Nixon, there has never been this level of concern over time, said Julian Zelizer, a Princeton historian and editor of a book on Trump's first term. Indeed, the situation today eclipses even Nixon. Unlike in the 70s, so much of this is playing out in public, especially with social media and cable television, said Mr. Zelizer. And he added, as a president who naturally disregards any guardrails or sense of decorum, Trump feels much freer, even than Nixon, to unleash his inner rage and to act on impulse. In his second term, Trump seems even less restrained and more incoherent at times. He uses more profanity, speaks longer, and regularly makes comments rooted in fantasy rather than fact. He keeps saying that his father was born in Germany, when in fact he was born in the Bronx. He repeats an invented story about his uncle, an MIT professor, telling him about teaching the terrorist known as the Unabomber. He wanders off into odd tangents, an 8-minute ramble at a Christmas reception about poisonous snakes in Peru, a long digression during a cabinet meeting about Sharpie pens, an interruption of Iran war update to praise the White House drapes. He has confused Greenland with Iceland, and more than once boasted of ending a fictional war between Cambodia and Azerbaijan, two countries separated by nearly 4,000 miles. Even before lashing out at Pope Leo XIV on Sunday night and then posting an image of himself as a Jesus-like figure before deleting it, Trump had shocked many with his outbursts at critics. He accuses those who anger him of sedition, a crime punishable by death. He claimed bizarrely that the Hollywood director Rob Reiner, who was allegedly stabbed to death by his son, was killed due to the anger he caused by opposing Trump. When Robert Mueller, the former FBI director and special counsel, died, Trump said, "Good, I'm glad he's dead," after condemning those who had commented on the death of Charlie Kirk. In recent days, he declared that Iran's new regime president was much less radicalized and far more intelligent than his predecessors, except that Iran's new president is the same as the old president. There's been no change in presidents. Trump may have meant the new supreme leader, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei, but he is considered even more hardline than his father, who was killed in the war. One difference from the first term is that there are few, if any, advisors, like Mr. Kelly, who consider it their responsibility to keep Trump from going too far. When he does what he does, everyone around him keeps their eyes to the floor and says nothing, said Mr. Zelizer. Unlike the first term, they don't even seem to maneuver behind the scenes to stop him. But there may be political latitude for it with his base. There is an element of American politics in the age of polarization, particularly within the GOP, that likes this style of leadership, said Mr. Zelizer. What can be more anti-establishment than someone who is willing to be out of control? So after all that heavy stuff, here's a somewhat lighter article. A Froyo company made splashy deals with MLB teams. Ex-employees say it was a big league con. This is by Sam Blum and Cody Stavenhagen. In the fall of 2023, the baseball world watched as Arizona Diamondbacks closer Paul Sewald cannonballed into the water. Star outfielder Corbin Carroll partied with goggles atop his head, and manager Torey Lovullo dove headfirst into a pool, splashing water on the concrete above. The Diamondbacks had just defeated the mighty Los Angeles Dodgers to advance to the 2023 National League Championship Series. The celebration in Chase Field's signature swimming pool led to some of the most indelible images in Diamondbacks history. Most of them happened to be filled with the logo of one particular corporate sponsor. The company was called Cremoli. It sold French frozen yogurt billed as a healthy, lactose-free treat. Proceeds were supposed to be donated to empowering women and girls globally. In January of 2022, the brand purchased sponsor rights to Chase Field's Keystone feature, then branded it as the Cremoli Pool Suite. Photographs show a massive popsicle sculpture looming in the background, with the company's name spelled out in black tiles at the pool's bottom and lit up in white on a sign above. The company agreed to pay the Diamondbacks more than $2.3 million over 5 years for the sponsorship. More than 350 miles away, Angels Stadium in Anaheim, California displayed similar Cremoli advertising, including a massive electronic sign glimmering behind Mike Trout in the outfield. Cremoli agreed to pay the Angels more than $3.45 million over 5 years, a deal that included rights to an animated between-innings race, in-game commercials, and more. Less than a year after Cremoli was on center stage as the Diamondbacks partied their way past the Dodgers, both the Angels and Diamondbacks were suing the company for non-payment. Cremoli also faced lawsuits from an upstate New York farm, an Arizona landlord, and multiple former employees. Their allegations largely aligned, that the company made big commitments, promised great things, then disappeared when it was time to pay the bills. The alleged cons deceived 2 MLB franchises, impact dozens of employees, and left many financial partners picking up the pieces. I think there were bad intentions from the beginning, said one of Cremoli's former employees. The Athletic reviewed dozens of court documents and spoke with more than 20 former Cremoli employees and business partners. Many of those employees, including some who signed non-disclosure agreements, were granted anonymity to speak candidly about their experiences. Quick pause. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. We were naive, said another former employee, in thinking it was a real product. When Kremli began its liftoff in January 2022, few who accepted their job offer knew about Stephen Delaporta's history of alleged fraud. Delaporta was tasked to run Kremli by founder Kylie Schuyler, a wealthy Orange County-based nonprofit executive. Delaporta was a short and stocky man in his 60s with gray, slick black hair. In most employees' first interactions with Delaporta, they said they found him charismatic, even trustworthy. But for much of his life, the man had a trail of lawsuits alleging money borrowed and money owed. I'm just assuming because he's done this time and again that he's got the ability to sort of sell himself to people, said Jeremy Sitkoff, an attorney who successfully represented a client who sued him for fraud. The Athletic made numerous attempts to reach Delaporta and Schuyler. Delaporta did not respond to 6 separate messages sent at different times over the last year, and did not answer his phone or respond to voicemails. The Athletic attempted unsuccessfully to locate him in person at listed addresses in Arizona. One of the addresses tracked to a private mailbox at a UPS store. Another led to a house where he no longer lived, according to its current residents, who added that mail still occasionally arrived for him at the home. Photos of him could not be found online, and employees said they didn't have pictures of their former boss. Schuyler did not respond to multiple messages sent to her personal and professional email addresses. An email sent to her foundation, Global Girls Glow, did not receive a response. The Athletic traveled to the foundation's Southern California address, which was also a private mailbox in a UPS store. The listed phone number for the foundation was disconnected. The Athletic called a cell phone number listed for her husband, Doug Hodge, whom employees said was also involved in Kremli. Hodge answered the phone, confirmed his identity, and declined to answer questions, stating, "I'm not involved." He passed along Schuyler's cell phone number. She didn't respond to a text or voicemail. James Austin Woods, an attorney for Leonid Consortium International, Kremli's corporate parent company, declined comment via cell phone with reporters who stood in the lobby of his office building. He passed along a phone number for Rich Rossi, who he said was general counsel. The Athletic sent 3 separate messages to Rossi and attempted to call him twice, but didn't receive a response. Per federal court filings, Delaporta was sued in 2005, alleged to have accepted and resold more than $2 million worth of goods without paying a plaintiff their share. A ruling from a district judge concluded Delaporta used one company as a front for another that was blackballed in the industry and was passing invoices from his left hand to his right. And I have to say that this article goes on at great length detailing their crimes. They are not clearly trustworthy people. You shouldn't invest in Kremli. And here's an essay by Clifford Winston, and it's called, my phone is freezing, it's called The Death of the Basic American Car, by Clifford Winston. For generations, working and middle-class Americans could find an inexpensive, reliable set of wheels to get around. In the 1970s oil crisis, such modest models came to be known as econoboxes and surged in popularity, particularly among a large and vibrant middle class. The average transaction price for a new car now sits at around $50,000. In December, it became just about impossible to find one for less than $20,000. A Honda Civic hatchback, most start at $28,000. The Touring Hybrid costs more than $32,000. How about the Chevy Trailblazer? On most lots, its price tag approaches $25,000. The Toyota Corolla, the hybrid trims start around $26,000. Forget the Chevy Malibu, it was discontinued last year. While politicians and economists scratch their heads at voters upset about affordability and a decent economy, they seem to somehow miss the fact that for most Americans, the purchase of a car has become a death sentence. To fix the problem, policymakers must overturn what has been for decades the third rail in American politics. It's time to stop coddling Detroit automakers and accept that tariff is not, as President Trump would say, the most beautiful word in the dictionary, by opening the American market to cars made in China and elsewhere. People at the bottom of the income scale feel the pain most. Once they could turn to the used car lot, but even that's become a minefield of aging, increasingly repair prone vehicles with six-figure odometers and five-figure price tags. For anyone on a budget, an aging car is a trap. Auto repair costs jumped 15% in the last year alone, driven by the complexity of modern sensors and labor shortages. An average trip to the mechanic now costs roughly $840, an amount that around 40% of Americans likely could not cover with the cash they have on hand. When faced with a costly repair, many are forced to choose between paying to fix their vehicle or making their loan payment. Little wonder, then, that repossessions, the extreme outcome of the modern automobile affordability crisis, roughly doubled in the last 5 years and are projected to surpass 3 million by the end of 2026, echoing the peak of the Great Recession. Losing a car can force you into a state of physical and economic immobility. That is especially true in rural and suburban landscapes where public transit is a ghost. Yasmin Alexander, a 31-year-old manager at a Little Caesars in Lafayette, Louisiana, saved enough money to buy a used 2010 GMC Terrain for $9,000, a significant investment given her modest income. The car ran for only 6 months before the engine failed. After a costly attempt at repairs, the vehicle died again before she even made it home. Public transit in Lafayette could not meet her needs, so she relies on her boyfriend, who drives for DoorDash, for a 40-minute commute to work each way. She was willing to tell her story, but the overwhelming majority of people I interviewed felt such a profound sense of social shame associated with being carless that they wouldn't speak for the record. Over and over, they described the missed play dates and doctor's appointments, the day-to-day stress of planning a commute, and the shame they felt about falling behind their peers. The death of the Econobox has eroded the independence that used to define American life, leaving motorists in a state of permanent financial and mechanical dependency. It wasn't always like this. In the post-war era, the middle class was growing fast, and Detroit offered a bevy of stripped-down sedans with simple, easy-to-fix mechanics designed for the average American family. If you're old enough, you may remember the Ford Falcon parked on the streets of Mayberry, the fictional town in the Andy Griffith Show. Introduced in 1960, it cost, ready for this, $1,900, or about 4 months of median family income. In 1973's American Graffiti, Harrison Ford looked cool in a 1955 Chevy 150. The price tag in 1955, $1,900, or around $22,000 in today's dollars. Or take the Honda Civic. The first Honda Civic hit the American market in 1973 at the height of the oil crisis. Small, fuel efficient, and reliable, it quickly gained a following of families looking to economize. It cost just $2,100 or $1,500 today. Over time, Honda changed the design. By 1988, the Civic had upgraded suspensions, a more powerful engine, more legroom and cabin space, and a sunroof. Honda added navigational systems and heated seats in the 2000s. In the 2010s, the Civic had a new sound system with Bluetooth controls and a push-button start. Today, the cars are more than 3.5 feet longer and 3 times more powerful than the original model. With an average transaction price of over $30,000, they cost almost twice as much in real terms as they did when they were introduced. What happened? How did a basic necessity of American life become a luxury good? We have to start with the transformation of the economy itself beginning in the late 1970s. While hourly compensation for the typical worker remained nearly stagnant, massive stock market bull runs and rising home equity have enriched the most affluent households. Today, there are so many wealthy people who can afford luxury cars that it simply isn't that profitable for companies to produce cars for the bottom 40% of Americans by income. That's part of the reason manufacturers started rolling out so many higher priced, higher tech vehicles. The profits generated by an inexpensive car pale in comparison to what can be earned from a souped up mid-size SUV or a light truck. Beginning with the release of its 2001 King Ranch, Ford has rolled out a dizzying array of increasingly elaborate and expensive models of its basic truck, the F 150. The top of the line Platinum Plus model now boasts massaging front seats and a Bang & Olufsen Unleashed 14 speaker audio system and often retails for almost $90,000 compared with $29,000 adjusted for inflation for a basic model in 1990. Today, Detroit doesn't need the average American to buy a car. Better to sell affluent households their second SUV. It wasn't just changes to the economy that led car makers to abandon the Econobox. Decades of protectionism enabled this shift. What started in 1964 as a retaliatory strike against European duties on American poultry grew over time into an impenetrable shield to safeguard domestic automakers' sales of light trucks and United Auto Workers' jobs from a rising tide of foreign imports. Both political parties participated. In 1981, the Reagan administration pressured the Japanese government to cap vehicle exports, leading the Japanese to shift to more expensive vehicles that would increase profit. Naturally, Detroit raised prices as well. Even during the free trade era of NAFTA, initially proposed by Ronald Reagan, negotiated by President George H.W. Bush, and ultimately pushed through by President Bill Clinton, the U.S. maintained a tariff on imported passenger cars from outside North America. During this period, lawmakers set fuel economy standards for trucks and SUVs that were roughly 6 to 8 miles per gallon less stringent than those for cars. They'd hoped the change would keep costs low for farmers and tradespeople who needed larger engines for heavy work, but it ultimately helped drive Detroit to dump the fuel efficient sedan for the large, high profit margin SUV. After the financial crisis of 2008, policymakers turned against globalization and free trade. In his first term, Trump declared foreign cars a threat to national security and slapped a 25% tariff on $250 billion worth of Chinese goods, including auto components and electric vehicles. President Biden doubled down on them, and in his second term, Trump imposed another sweeping 25% tariff on imported automobiles and parts, a policy that was expected to add several $1,000s to the sticker price of even the most affordable vehicles. Decades of protectionism shielded Detroit from the robust global competition that would have forced it to match the quality, fuel efficiency, and pricing of its foreign rivals, and had the unintended consequence of forcing millions of Americans to pay well above market prices elsewhere in the world. Just 14 years ago, it was still relatively easy to find a new car for around $25,000, adjusted for inflation, or less. There were roughly a dozen models to choose from. Since then, many have been discontinued. Today, there are only 4 cars available at that price, and Detroit has no plans to add more. There is one obvious way to bring more inexpensive cars into the American market. If the Trump administration lifts the embargo on electric vehicles and hybrids made by Chinese automakers and sold worldwide, the number could rise to 11. Those Chinese cars aren't just cheaper than the American alternatives, they're often better. Take BYD's slightly more upscale Seal sedan. It's similar to Tesla's Model 3 introduced 9 years ago, but the Seal costs roughly $20,000 less than the Model 3. The Seal's premium model offers substantially more horsepower, and its battery not only lasts longer, it can also be 80% charged in just 37 minutes. The Seal isn't just a budget alternative, it's a more advanced machine. Another quick pause. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Policymakers and critics have long argued that opening the U.S. market to Chinese cars could destroy thousands of American manufacturing jobs, and they point out that the Chinese government subsidizes its electric vehicle companies so heavily that no foreign for-profit auto company can possibly compete in China. Those concerns are valid, but solutions exist. We could allow Chinese automakers to enter the U.S. market provided their cars are manufactured in the U.S. Their costs aren't subsidized by the Chinese government, and Chinese automakers satisfy U.S. government security concerns with regard to digital communications. Canada is already moving in that direction. 2 months ago, it slashed the tariffs on some Chinese electric vehicles to 6.1% from 100%. Soon, Canadians will be able to buy the BYD Dolphin or the Wuling Mini, which are likely to retail for about $20,000, even with tariffs. The U.S. could do the same. There are signals that the Trump administration is open to this approach. In a January speech at the Detroit Economics Club, Trump said Chinese automakers were welcome to sell in the U.S. so long as they build American factories and hire American workers. And there are reports that Ford's chief executive, Jim Farley, has engaged in preliminary talks with administration officials for a potential joint venture with a Chinese partner that ensures the technology is shared and profits remain on U.S. soil, the terms China once imposed on us. Trump's claim that we have the greatest economy in history is pure fiction, but the affordability crisis is not, and it will not recede quietly. The real political test for 2028 will be whether any candidate has the courage to stop treating mobility, both the physical freedom of affordable automobile transportation and the economic promise of upward social movement, as a lost cause. For decades, the Econobox, the cheap, unpretentious, boxy workhorse, was more than just a staple of the American middle class. It offered millions a chance at the American dream. Bringing it back by re-embracing free trade could turn the automobile into what it was always meant to be, not a luxury for the few, but an engine of prosperity for the many. And we'll conclude with Pete Hegseth's Gospel of Carnage by Frank Bruni. I guess a zealot by nature can't hide. Too extremes are his too extreme are his convictions, too grand his designs, too consuming his arrogance. And so, over recent weeks, Pete Hegseth has fully revealed himself. He has made clear that every missile the United States fires, every bomb it drops, every Iranian it kills is for Jesus. Praise be the Lord, who has given America the power to wipe out an entire civilization. That's what Trump threatened to do in an intermittently jaunty social media post, no less, and Hegseth gave no indication of unwillingness to execute that order. He brandishes assertions about God's will with the exaggerated brio of an electronics merchant pressing flyers on pedestrians passing by his new megastore. Have I got a holy war for you? Embrace the death, exult over the destruction. What only looks like hell is a ticket to heaven. Not everyone agrees. In this era of the extraordinary, Pope Leo XIV has taken the unusual step of publicly and specifically rebuking the Trump administration's assertion of divine approval for the war against Iran. In a social media post on Friday, he wrote, "God does not bless any conflict. Anyone who is a disciple of Christ, the Prince of Peace, is never on the side of those who once wielded the sword and today drop bombs." That was hardly the Pope's first reprimand. During a Mass just before Easter, he voiced his concern that the Christian mission had been distorted by a desire for domination, entirely foreign to the way of Jesus Christ. And before that, he cautioned that Jesus does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war, but rejects them. The Pope's preoccupation obviously reflects all the talk of God, God, God from Hegseth and from Trump, whose piety is profound when it's convenient. Hegseth at one point used a Pentagon news conference in which he celebrated Iranians' experience of death and destruction from above to beseech Americans to pray for our troops daily on bended knee in the name of Jesus Christ. As my Times colleagues Greg Jaffe and Elizabeth Diaz wrote, more than any top American military leader in recent history, Hegseth has framed U.S. military operations in the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America as bigger than politics or foreign policy. Often he has imbued these actions with a Christian moral underpinning that suggests they are divinely sanctioned. Suggests is gentle, and that article was published before Hegseth volubly likened the rescue of an American airman shot down over Iran to the resurrection of Jesus. A pilot reborn, all home and accounted for, a nation rejoicing, Hegseth said, God is good. Hegseth has a tattoo on his right biceps that says Deus Vult, Latin for God wills it. He has described that phrase as a battle cry during the Crusades, which of course pitted Christians against Muslims. He titled his 2020 book American Crusade, notice any fixation, and wrote in it that Americans must fight like our fellow Christians 1,000 years ago. He belongs to the communion of Reformed evangelical churches, which exalts patriarchy and descends from a movement that argues that the Bible's edicts should prevail over secular law. He tugs church into state. As Michelle Borstein wrote recently in the Washington Post, every month at the Pentagon, Hegseth hosts evangelical worship services that legal experts say are unprecedented. His social media profile and public comments routinely espouse his understanding of Christianity, which is one that would dominate American life and cast those who disagree with him as God's enemy. He has brought clergy from his small Christian denomination to preach at the Pentagon, including a prominent pastor who says women shouldn't have the right to vote. How exactly did he become Secretary of Defense, to use the traditional title for the job? It's astonishing to look back at the period in early 2025 before his Senate confirmation hearing and recall all the worry about the allegations of his public drunkenness in the past, of his gross mismanagement of the groups Vets for Freedom and Concerned Veterans for America, of his sexually abusive behavior. Those were indeed blaring alarms, but they were no more concerning than his theocratic bent, which was minimized in the shuffle. That's how it goes with Trump and his tribe. The scandals and outrages pile too high for even a small fraction of them to be noticed properly. Besides which, Christian nationalism has embedded itself too deeply in the MAGA movement and the evolving Trump administration for Hegseth's version of it to stand out as boldly as it should. He has faded into the crowd of holy rollers. In normal times, under a normal president, we would be talking nonstop about the fact that the lethal behemoth of the United States military is under the supervision of someone who holds such extreme religious beliefs and not only admits, but brags about the extent to which they define and drive him. In normal times, under a normal president, we would gasp at the messianic bellicose timbre of government video distributed last year that read a montage of our military arsenal to a soundtrack of Hegseth's voice reciting the Lord's Prayer. It didn't merely imply that ours was an army of God, it trumpeted that with unsettling fervor, with chilling grandiosity. Hegseth's is a gospel of carnage, and I have so many questions about it. How does he square his Christianity with references to no quarter, no mercy for enemies of the U.S.? That's not how Jesus taught. How does he reconcile his certainty that he and his spiritual brethren stand at the zenith of all righteousness, empowered to cast unforgiving judgment on all who don't subscribe to their faith, with the Christian virtue of humility, which Jesus exemplified? Hegseth exemplifies vanity, and I'm not referring to the shirtless photos and shellacked hair. I mean the insistence that his way is his, capital H way, and the only way, that God has bestowed a unique blessing on America, whose might proves its right and whose killing is a kind of grace. What a strange religion. But there's so much about Hegseth and America right now that I find bizarre. And we'll conclude with some letters to the editor. This is about the election yesterday in Hungary. This is a letter by Oren Spiegler from Peters Township, Pennsylvania. The voters of Hungary have dealt a well-deserved blow not only to Prime Minister Viktor Orban, but also to a U.S. administration that sought to prop him up. Mr. Orban's decisive loss in his country's election is good news for the civilized world. President Trump and Mr. Orban enjoyed an unholy alliance, both of them being individuals who have sought to rule with an iron fist, weakening democracy, consolidating power, undermining the independence of the judiciary, restricting media freedom, engaging in corruption and favoritism, limiting dissent, cracking down on LGBTQ rights, treating asylum seekers harshly, controlling academia, ruling by emergency powers, and maintaining close ties with repressive regimes. So strongly did Trump want his pal Victor to win that he sent Vice President J.D. Vance to Hungary to express support. Yet another instance of meddling in another nation's affairs. The Vance visit may well have backfired. Those of us who believe in our country's tenets and values should be glad that Hungarian voters voted for a brighter future in spite of what our leader wanted them to do. And you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Monday, April 13th New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. This is Ted. I hope you enjoyed this, as always. I hope the background noise in the hotel wasn't too bad. And I look forward to speaking to you next week when I'm at home and it'll be quieter. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week. Bye.